All right. Hi there, everyone. We're just about to get started. All right. Welcome. My name is David Heiser. I'm the Director of Student Programs at the Yale Peabody Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Research Spotlight Talk. This is a series that we began about a year ago that features graduate students at Yale who are doing remarkable research and who are nearing the end of their graduate career at Yale and have some really interesting research that they've published that they are ready to share with us. The way these will work, is that our student's going to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. We have turned the chat off, so we ask you to direct any and all questions, if you're watching this on Zoom, through the Q&A function, which can be found in the bottom bar. I also want to remind you, or let you know if you don't know this already, that this is being live captioned. So if you're interested in having the captions on or require them, at the bottom bar as well, you should find a button that says live transcript or CC, and you can click on that and bring the closed captions up on your screen. Without really any further ado, let's dive into today's program. I'm really excited to have Sam Snow with us today. I've gotten to know Sam pretty well from our years together, seeing each other mainly in the hallways of the Environmental Sciences Center just outside of his lab and the Vertebrate Zoology Collection Division there, where Sam spent years working with Rick Prum and is an ornithologist. So he got his undergraduate degree at Dartmouth and then came over to Yale. He is now actually a visiting scholar at Carleton University in Ottawa. So we're, the beauty of these webinars is that Sam is in fact coming to us from another country at the moment. Not two different time zone, thankfully, but another country. So I'm really glad we could do this. Anyway, Sam has bailed me out on multiple occasions when I've needed someone to help give some tours of the ornithology collections, and it's just been great to get to know him over the years and to think about talk with him about his research. We had an undergraduate intern work with him for one summer, looking at some of the videos that Sam bases a lot of his work and his modeling on. And I know that student, Benjamin Klempe, had a great experience. Ben, if you're out there, hi. Not sure if you're here today, but anyway, without any further ado, I want Sam to get to his talk here. So I'm just going to turn it over to him to hear about sexual conflict over mate choice. Sam, good to have you.
Oh, thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to get my screen share on here. And we'll get going. Okay.
All right, looks good.
Great. Well, thanks again for inviting me, David. I really appreciate it. And to everybody out there in the webinar universe for taking time to hear about some of my work on sexual conflict over mate choice. So, throughout history, particularly from the 17th to 19th centuries, an enormous effort to catalog natural history gave insights that ultimately led to the theory of evolution. Today, details and patterns in natural history continue to challenge our ideas and lead us to refine how we think evolution can work to produce the amazing diversity we see in nature. But the possible evolutionary processes we consider can be complicated and difficult to intuit. So modern evolutionary biologists like me often use mathematical models to guide our intuition. So for the first part of this talk, I'll show you an example of this from my own work on sexual conflict in bowerbirds. Then I'll show how the insights from our models inspired us to develop new techniques to examine lek-breeding sage-grouse natural history in a new light. But before I get too deep into it, I want to talk a little bit more about modeling in evolutionary biology. So we take inspiration from the details of natural history that challenge our conceptions of the evolutionary process. However, often the goal is not only to explain the specific patterns that inspired us, but also to guide our intuition about what's possible to expect in general. Therefore, we want to make the simplest evolutionary model possible that still has all the features that we're interested in. For example, things that replicate, heritable traits of interest, differential fitness associated with the traits. And for our purposes here going forward, we're going to need females and males. So even though in this case, we're not going to be explicitly modeling the evolution of specific gene sequences, we do model our traits of interest as being controlled by genetic elements that behave like genes in populations. This means that individuals will have traits that can be passed on to their descendants. In the models I'm going to show you, individuals can have one of two different versions of a trait, conceptually corresponding to gene variants. As an example, imagine a display trait like a bird's colorful plumage. These birds here happen to be my cockatiels, Frankie and Poutine, who are actually sitting here, thankfully napping. In this scenario, there could be a single display trait called T, let's say, that corresponds to the coloration of the plumage, and different gene variants, T1 and T2, for white and yellow color. We can use our model to ask if a trait variant that we're interested in will evolve by introducing it into our model population and looking at its proportion or frequency in the population over time. If there's selection for a trait, maybe it helps males get more mates. It'll grow in frequency in the population and become established over successive generations. So if we take this example, the frequency of the variant T2, yellow, grew to 0.6. Similarly, if it won't evolve, the trait variant we introduced will fail and go to 0 over time. Okay, so now we're ready to dive into the first section, looking at sexual conflict in bowerbirds. Sexual conflict over mating is often characterized by coevolutionary arms races, like in the now famous case of duck genital biology, wherein the vaginal tract of female ducks, which is shown here on the left, is a convoluted anti-corkscrew co-evolved in an apparent arms race over fertilization success with the male morphology here on the right, seemingly allowing females to block unwanted fertilizations and retain the benefits of mating with their social partners in the face of violent coercive attempts by other males. A hallmark of these costly arms races is that females evolve resistance that directly interfaces with the male coercive strategy, so that the evolution of better female resistance selects for more effective male coercion and so on. However, some interesting facts from bowerbird natural history suggest an unappreciated alternative to this costly arms race scenario. So this is the courtship display arena of the tooth-billed bowerbird from Australia. A female that arrives at one of these piles of leaves has never been observed longer than 3.8 seconds before being accosted by the male. It doesn't seem like it's so easy to evaluate a mating display in that amount of time. This, on the other hand, is a satin bowerbird courtship arena. It's not a nest, but a structure built by the male called a bower. When the female comes to visit, she sits right there in the middle. The male displays out front, and she will often spend several minutes evaluating his display. If the male wants to attempt mating, he has to go around to the back of the bower, giving the female the opportunity to escape out the front. Fascinatingly, it appears that the bower structure itself functions specifically to protect females from coercive mating. So we suggest that instead of evolving direct resistance to unwanted male advances and touching off an arms race, that maybe females can actively remodel males, that is, change the males themselves by evolving mate preferences for new male traits, such as those protective bowers that enhance freedom of mate choice, even though the bower is likely costly to the males and hinders their mating opportunities. Now, whether this is possible is a complicated question involving a lot of moving parts, including male display and coercion and possible female preference for multiple traits, like the display trait and the male bowers. Since the answer isn't immediately obvious, we built a theoretical proof of concept model. So in the model, we track 3 different traits of interest, each with 2 variants. T for an attractive male display trait, B for bower structure that the males build, R for female preference for bowers. Individuals with the 1 variant do not express the trait, individuals with the 2 variant do. For example, for the bower trait, B2 males build some sort of structure while B1 males don't. For tractability, additionally, we assume that all females prefer males with attractive display traits, and all males are able to coerce females if given the opportunity. Mating occurs in 2 steps. This is important. First, females choose territories to visit. Females without a preference for bowers visit territories randomly, whereas females with a preference for bowers can preferentially visit males that have the gene variant for building them. Once they choose a territory, females are either coerced by the male there and do not have the opportunity to evaluate their mating display, or they are not coerced and they're able to accept or reject the male based on their display. How likely they are to be coerced by the male is controlled by a parameter that says how protective the bowers are. So maybe like how high are the walls, as opposed to just being a flat arrangement of leaves. So like in the cartoon example with the cockatiels that I showed you, we can ask whether the bowers and female preferences for them can evolve by introducing them into the population at low frequencies and seeing if they increase and become established. So first, let's explore an example of a run of the model where the B2 bowers confer no protection against coercion. Here, we're looking at the frequencies of the traits we're interested in, with preference for bowers on the x-axis and male bowers on the y-axis, starting at a low frequency. Here we can see that non-protective bowers ultimately fail, even though females like them. There's not enough advantage to overcome the costs. So without any additional selection, bower preferences, along with bowers, decay to 0. However, if we allow bowers to be fairly protective, we see something different. When male bowers are protective to females, bowers and the female preferences for them can invade and persist in the population in spite of the costs due to their utility in enhancing female sexual autonomy of mate choice. Females that prefer protective bowers gain an advantage by being more likely to have attractive male offspring, who themselves are also likely to build more protective bowers, which gives an advantage to females with a preference for bowers, and so on and so on. Indeed, you can see that the attractive male display trait in the population, shown here as the warmness of the color, concurrently increases because females are getting what they want more often. Obviously, a striking aspect of this is the spirally oscillations. As bowers come in, fewer matings are coerced, and females with a preference for bowers get an advantage by mating more often with attractive males, as shown by the orange line in the plot on the right. However, the protective bowers are out there in the population now and can act as a public good. So females without a preference for protective bowers, that blue line in the plot on the right, can freeload, reaping the benefits of increased freedom of choice without paying any of the costs of specifically seeking out bowers. And so they become favored briefly until bowers decrease again. Eventually, though, it does converge on an equilibrium where overall males rarely coerce and females have substantially increased ability to choose mates. So, in conclusion for section 1, inspired by bowerbirds, we have demonstrated the plausibility of a novel mechanism by which females select for male traits that enhance female freedom of mate choice as a result of sexual conflict over mating. Rather than always evolving in response to male advances in coercion leading to arms races, females can have an active role in shaping male coercive behavior to promote their own sexual autonomy. We also found that protection from coercion conferred by bowers can act as a public good, leading to freeloading and frequency-dependent oscillatory dynamics. This suggests that when field biologists are investigating remodeling processes in nature, they should expect to see potentially large variation in female preferences for remodeling traits like bowers and in the bowers themselves. Although the bowerbirds were our inspiration, the remodeling process actually could gain purchase in any scenario where preferences can act on multiple scales, allowing females to avoid direct coercion. For example, in our paper, we speculate that such a process could represent an alternative underlying mechanism for what's called the self-domestication of the early human lineage, wherein females forming friendship coalitions or choosing to associate with males with outward traits that are uncorrelated with aggression could have led to modern levels of reduced coercion in infanticide and reduced sexual dimorphism in traits such as body size and canine teeth. So, zooming back out, our research underscores the evolutionary importance of female resistance when male sexual coercion interferes with mate choice. And we showed that females can use behaviors and not just direct interaction to resist coercion. So in the latter half of this talk, I'll show how these theoretical insights led us, in collaboration with sociologists and other field biologists at UC Irvine and UC Davis, to rethink what we know about lek breeding systems and how they evolved. This is the project that David referred to earlier. So in lek breeding systems, where males gather to display and females visit to evaluate and choose mates, females can often observe both male courtship displays and fights. It has been theorized that male-male aggression may function itself as a display, giving females more information about suitors' quality and contributing to the evolution of leks as arenas for females to view more contests. However, males in many species, such as these greater sage grouse that we work with, often fight with females absent and can even attack during copulation attempts in seeming conflict with females' choices. So, classic theory suggests that fighting's good for females. But then we also have these interrupted copulations and other kinds of fights. This led us to ask, could there actually be sexual conflict over mate choice here? If male aggression in the form of courtship disruption and interrupted copulations were indeed largely in conflict with female mate choice, it would suggest drastically different evolutionary expectations theoretically. In that case, fighting among males would actually be an obstacle to the evolution of a stable functioning lek as an arena for female choice based on courtship display, rather than a force promoting lek evolution. Males would be incentivized, as in a tragedy of the commons, or in this case what we're calling a tragedy of the lek, to disrupt one another's copulations or courtship to the detriment of the group as a whole. This would also imply that instead of selecting for more aggressive males, females could be expected to select for remodeled males with reduced aggression or behaviors that regulate aggression in order to resist sexually coercive behavior, overcome the tragedy of the lek, and allow for persistence of lekking systems like we observe in nature. So, we wanted to reevaluate the role of aggression in lekking systems and see whether fighting was indeed sexy in sage grouse. So one difficulty in teasing apart different ideas about the role of aggression in mating systems is that we usually just correlate those behaviors with mating success. However, in cases like this, a correlation between the number of fights and the overall mating success of individuals could be misleading, feeding directly into evolutionary narratives that fighting is equivalent to a display. If we take a look at the actual event history underlying this plot, it's clear that fights and mating events are elements of social processes that unfold over time. By flattening the information on their sequence and timing in a classic linear model, we're actually implicitly assuming that females are making their mating decisions using information from events that haven't even happened yet. So, for this study, and for the first time in a natural system, we applied a dynamic network technique originally developed by sociologists to model the temporal dependencies of sequences of events among a network of individuals. In this framework, we model a hazard or a propensity of occurrence for each type of behavioral event that's possible at every moment in time. For example, if we take this network representing the current state of the lek, we can try to model, say, how likely is male A to be solicited to mate by a female in the near future. We can then look at the event history leading up to that point, and we can compare the performance of different models that include processes that might predict the events of interest, such as how much was male A fighting recently. This allows us to directly ask questions about potential causal relationships, such as, do particular histories of fights in front of females precipitate mating events? And how do past fights influence the likelihood of future fights? So here are the main results. If we do a traditional regression analysis, we, like previous studies, do find a loose correlation between fighting and mating. This, however, is misleading. When we compare a parameterized model of ours that uses individual attractiveness to explain variation in mating success with a model that uses fighting, we see that the attractiveness model actually performs much better. Moreover, our analysis shows that males are overall actually less likely to start fights and more likely to stop fights sooner when females are present, suggesting that male sage grouse have evolved to reduce their aggression in favor of display, providing direct evidence against the hypothesis that females use male aggression to inform their mate choices. So if not to impress females, how does fighting relate to mating success and female choice? The main influences of fighting on mating success are indirect, affecting the opportunities for mating solicitations and affecting the success of copulation attempts. In general, fighting actually begets more fighting and increases the risk of interrupted copulations. This plot shows how different kinds of behaviors can affect the future hazard of getting attacked for an average male in the presence of females. The color is the probability of future copulation interruptions. Attacking and then winning is the only type of fight that does not increase one's future hazard of being attacked, and therefore the only type of fight that does not precipitate being forced to fight more and more. In all, we can see that a successful male strategy involves the self-regulation of fighting in the presence of females, and the judicious application of fights such that one has a strong history of winning. This helps to avoid copulation interruptions and entanglement in time-consuming fights that take away from display opportunities. In conclusion here, our analysis paints the lek as a balancing act among conflicting forces. On the one hand, we demonstrated that some males have clear incentives to start fights, both to waste other males' time and interrupt competitors' copulations, and that these behaviors interfere with female mate choice. It's easy to see that all males, particularly less attractive males, acting in their own self-interest in this way could lead to a tragedy of the commons, or here, a tragedy of the lek, wherein the lek would cease to function as an arena for females to freely make mating decisions. On the other hand, we also identified behavioral mechanisms by which the tragedy of the lek may be avoided, via the self-regulation of fights when females are present, and by reducing the risk of copulation interruptions through pairwise dominance relationships. These findings suggest that social systems that regulate conflict and promote females' choice based on display are likely fundamental to the stable evolution of leks. This is consistent with the intriguing possibility that females may be remodeling male behavior in a process just like we saw in bowerbirds, overcoming sexual conflict by selection for social environments that are more conducive to free choice. This is the subject of ongoing inquiry, including more theory modeling, so I'll let you know how that goes. So to wrap up, we've explored a little bit about how we evolutionary biologists, and ornithologists in my case, take natural history insights and translate them into new thinking about evolution. Bowerbird behavior and bower structure led us to build a new evolutionary model, showing that rather than interfacing directly with coercion, females may actively remodel males to promote their own sexual autonomy. We then applied some of those new insights to change the way we think about a system we thought we knew well already. We showed that, contrary to previous thinking, fighting isn't actually sexy for sage grouse, and that maybe this is actually more typical than we thought. We further showed that the regulation of fighting may be fundamental to stable lek evolution and the avoidance of a tragedy of the lek, and that this may be the result of a previously unappreciated remodeling process like the bowerbirds. So with that, I want to thank all my collaborators and contributors, my funding sources and institutions, and also I want to credit all the people who created the wonderful photos and videos that I shared with you in the talk. And I'd be happy to take questions. Thanks a lot.
Wow, great. Thank you, Sam, for a really interesting presentation about some pretty complex ideas. And I think, I really think for me, and I imagine for many of the rest of the people on this webinar, you've kind of expanded how we might think about, bird mating, if not, mating in non-human animals in general. I mean, you're really sort of talking about trying to get into their heads in a way, which is a fascinating way of looking at things. You've really analyzed these systems, and the behaviors of these birds based on some things that I don't think many of us at first would necessarily give these birds sort of credit for being able to process. And granted, some of this is clearly, the way evolutionary biology works. Some of this is behavior that is really driven by instinct or driven by observation. But others, it seems like it might be more complex, you know. And so one of the things I was wondering about is, it seems like what you're suggesting is that in both of these cases with bowerbirds and grouse, that females would need to um, not only be making sort of judgments based on their immediate observations, but they'd need to be making judgments based on past observations as well. So therefore, they'd need to kind of remember who's who in these groups of birds. Is that true?
Yeah, well, so that acts on several levels, right? I think it from an evolutionary perspective, they don't need to necessarily see the big picture of like, how's this gonna affect my granddaughters. But you're right that we do have to make assumptions about what kind of social spatial memory these birds have. And one of the powerful aspects of that dynamic network analysis I shared was we can actually test different. So I mentioned that we can test different processes that might underlie the pattern of behaviors that we observe.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tested a ton of different variations on was actually the time scale of their memory of interactions.
Huh. Okay.
So we can say like, we can build a model that says like, well, let's say they only have information about what happened 5 seconds ago.
Hmm.
And we'll see how well that does through simulation, basically, at explaining the observed patterns we see. Then we can also have one that says, actually, let's say they're geniuses and they can remember everything that ever happened to them. And of course, the actual answer is somewhere in between. And that's what we find, that like the most salient or the most important like time scale for sage grouse, let's say, in thinking about like the patterns of fighting and mating, that we found was basically like what happened yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not to say they don't remember past that. It's just
Right.
like the most important like contributing factors, like what happened yesterday. And we do find like a little bit of effect for like cumulative what's going on. But
Yeah. But it sounds like what you're saying too is that they can recognize individuals
that's
in their.
absolutely, that's without a doubt for me. Yeah,
Okay.
they know who's who. Well, if you think about it for sage grouse, and this goes for bowerbirds too, like these are relatively small populations
Right.
with individuals that interact with one another all the time. And
Yep.
especially at the lek, right? It's the
Yeah.
same. I'm telling you, I've been out there, I've got the video, it's the same guys every day. Right?
Okay.
They're these same guys. They show up every day. There's sort of other guys that come in and out, but there's always like the core. Like in the case of the lek that was the subject of the study that I shared, um, there were basically 5 males that were always there. They were every day,
Okay.
and
Okay.
they know exact. They always, first thing in the morning, there they are. They stand in the same spot.
Yeah. Amazing.
They stand in the same
Amazing.
spatial arrangement.
Interesting.
They do
Yeah.
this thing, they fight, they do all the things, and so they know who one another
All
are.
right. So could you, I know I'm familiar with the term lek and what it is because I've actually been lucky enough to visit one at one point in my earlier days. But maybe I just wonder if maybe you would take a moment to explain to everyone on this webinar who might not be familiar with the term what a lek is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I touched on it briefly, that it's sort of usually characterized by an aggregation of usually males, right? So there are actually several instances. I think Rick Crum and I sat down. We tried to count all the different independent origins of lekking across birds, and it's at least 9. But it's sort of evolutionary through history. But so one of the hallmarks is that the males will congregate in space, which is really tricky to try to figure out why would they do that, because they're basically putting themselves in direct comparison with their direct, most intense competitors. Another important aspect of lekking, though, so the males are all there, they sort of congregate. You could see in the video of the
Right.
sage grouse, they're all within meters of one another. This varies to some extent, right? But the other key aspect of leks is that the males do not defend any resources that the females could want. So they're always associated with no male parental care at all.
Okay.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
a really important piece of this. So the
Yeah.
females, they show up, they compare the males, they make decisions however they do, and then they'll mate, and then they go off, raise the babies, do whatever. The males, their whole raison d'etre, right? The male's whole point of existence is to just do that dance, that weird dance all day long, every day. So it's really intense for them. But yeah, so that's basically what characterizes a lek. Some people would say, like the bowerbirds, for example, have a similar situation where the males don't do any parental care. They just have their bower and their structure and their decorations and everything that they do. And the females go off.
Okay.
But the males don't aggregate very closely in space. So some people might define that as what they call like an exploded lek or a dispersed lek.
Okay.
Where the males have territories, but they don't defend any resources that the females can actually like directly use or what they would want.
All right. So a true lek is more than just a social aggregation. It's actually a spatial thing as well. It exists on the ground somewhere effectively.
Generally speaking, although yeah, you could argue maybe that like it could be a mobile like if it's like a school. Some people consider some behaviors that fish do to be a lek.
Oh, interesting.
Where
Okay.
they congregate,
Yeah.
but usually it is tied to a particular place.
Okay. All right. Cool. So someone wanted to know how they'd be able to rewatch this. They wrote a paper years ago on the greater prairie chickens for school in Kansas. That's cool. So I'll just answer that by saying this will be available to rewatch. The best place to do it is probably on the Peabody's YouTube channel. So check that soon. Sam, there was another question relating to these birds' ability to process things, basically bird brain kind of question here. In your opinion, is sexual autonomy a self-aware cognitive process?
Well, that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I guess I want to emphasize that I guess the theory of mind, like what's actually going on in their heads, is not necessary to explain the phenomena that we're describing here in the model.
Right.
However, it should not come as a surprise that that negative emotions and subjective experiences should be associated with coercive mating events, right?
Yeah.
And that potentially says something more fundamental about why such things are so anathema in the sense of the subjective experience of it.
Yeah.
However, we can't speak to that in
sure.
the model.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we're really not, as much as we try to get into their heads, we're not fully able to to understand the level of cognitive autonomy, right? I mean,
certainly, and one thing that I feel strongly about as an aspect of the importance of this work is that it makes space in evolutionary biology for the possibility of like sexual coercion and sexual autonomy as itself an evolutionary force, right? And that it sort of allows for the possibility of like the evolution of essentially negative subjective experience associated with sexual coercion. Whereas like in that sort of classic scenario I described, right, where we say, oh, fighting is good for females because it helps them evaluate males and things like that, it effaces the female's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a second related question, which is really kind of asking about does the presence of sexual selection, mate choice, and sexual conflict imply feelings and emotions in animals? So, I mean, you've kind of addressed that. I don't know if you want to add anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, so like the answer is always like, well, not necessarily, but very possibly, right? And
Yeah.
the feelings and emotions, the again, yeah, I would say like that. I would call it like the subjective experiences of those
Mhm.
animals.
Sure.
I think going forward, I think we should not be surprised to one day learn that they're more like us than we imagined,
Fair enough.
right? And
Yeah.
that maybe we're more like them than we imagined. I think is
Yeah.
always the answer that comes up again and again is like, wow, like birds are a lot more person-y than I ever imagined. People are a lot more birdy, and it goes back and back, right? And like you guys spoke in your panel discussion, I think earlier, like dinosaurs are a lot more birdy than we ever imagined,
Yeah.
probably, and birds
Yeah.
are a lot more dinosaur-y than we ever met. It's like these are all part of a lineage. So again, it's like we shouldn't be shocked when one day we find that these things are sort of more close to our experiences than we would have thought.
Well, luckily there is no end to the research that can be done in these systems, and you're going to be leading the way here in this one. So, um, someone has a question that actually kind of relates to my earlier one. Um, Wondering if you mentioned that the birds can tell each other apart. This question is really, how do you differentiate between them, or how does a casual observer? Because to us, they all look pretty much alike. But is that not really true?
Such a good question. So with difficulty, right? Unless you really, I can tell Frankie and Poutine apart, they're different colors, no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
Right. But yeah, to my eye, even to a professional observer's eye, it's really difficult. So obviously one way people know is you can capture and then mark and release birds, right? So like with leg bands, colored leg bands, some of the birds in
yeah.
that population of sage grouse, for example, are marked that way. But we actually have a system for the sage grouse that the team at UC Davis developed, which is they realized that so when the sage grouse display, they put up their tail really straight
Yep.
and they show off these undertail covert feathers that
Mhm.
have white spots on the ends. And what they realized is that that pattern of white spots is actually distinctive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so what they would do, or what we would do on the field, is there's actually two teams on the lek. One's in a tent up on the hill, videoing the whole scene, so we can get
Okay.
all the data about it, what everybody's doing. There's another team on the like right up next to them, close, with a little spotting scope and a camera, and they would go around and photograph the birds' butts when they face the camera, and then compare those to like a butt print sort of mugshot sheet to be like, all right, that's
Nice.
this guy, that's this guy, that's this guy, and then
Yeah.
we match that information up later to the video.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's what like the team at Yale, that's what the undergrads were doing, is they take all that field data and say like, oh, butt print 5 was at this spot on the lek at this time, and then we can match that up with the video and then follow him through his day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Neat.
it's a lot of work.
Oh,
But yeah,
no,
so
I'm
so
sure.
the short answer is butt prints is how
Yeah.
we could tell the sage grouse apart.
I love it. Well, that's a great answer. That's the answer that we needed.
Yeah.
So, and good to know that there is
Answer that
one.
people want. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fantastic. So someone asked again about rewatching this later. And if you're like me, you will want to rewatch it because there was a lot packed in there, and modeling. A lot of us are used to sort of thinking about animal behavior or specimen-based research, but the modeling takes me and probably much of this audience to a slightly different place where watching it again will be really useful. So you can certainly see this again on our YouTube channel, the Yale Peabody Museum. If you just go to our homepage, down there at the bottom, you can click a link to our YouTube channel where you will soon find this talk, but you will also find all the other research spotlight talks that have happened and a bunch of other talks, including the panel that Sam mentioned from last week, the Paleo Roundtable that we had. So a lot is on our YouTube channel. I do believe that you'll also be able to see this on our Facebook page as well very shortly. So probably either place is fine. Sam, we have a question about the bowerbirds.
Great.
All right, and so this one is actually from Sydney, who asks, can you tell us a little more about the bowers themselves? What are they usually made of, and how does the availability of various plants impact the male's ability to build them? And do you consider that in your model?
Oh yeah. Oh, such great questions. I'm gonna pull something up here for you.
All right.
Just give me one moment. All right. Why is this being weird?
Trying to share your screen again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here we go. All right, so can everybody see that?
We are seeing McGregor's bowerbird. It looks like maybe, yeah, a round thing with a cool cone in the middle, spiky cone.
Like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree right there in the middle. Yeah. So to get to the first question, right? Like what's, I guess, the structure of the bower? Can I talk more about the structure of the bowers?
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of diversity among the various species of bowerbirds. Really, it's a couple dozen. And they fall into one of two categories in general. The one I showed you with the satin bowerbird was called an avenue bower, where it has sort of two walls. But in some species, actually, they do like a double avenue, or in one, they make a wide avenue.
Wow.
But the sticks, so they're made out of mostly these like piles of sticks. The sticks are actually less densely arranged, so that the female sits sideways inside the bower, and the male displays through the screen of sticks on the other side.
Wow.
So this is another piece of evidence that lets us think like, oh, like, this is really separating the male from the female, protecting her from unwanted advances, right?
Right.
So the bowerbird family, or one part of the bowerbird family that builds the bowers, is split into two lineages. One makes the avenue bowers, the other makes maypole bowers, which is what I'm showing you here.
Wow.
So this thing is like really big. And the McGregor's bowerbird and other species in this genus, they build these maypole bowers of various types. But the main thing about them from our perspective for like this talk and this model is when the female comes to visit, the male will stand she'll get in that rut there, and the male will stand on the other side of the little tree and then peek around at her. And actually I think it's either McGregor's or Archbold's that has actually a really big crest that they stick up and they sort of wave it around the edge so the female can see. And then if she wants to allow him to get close, she can just stand still and let him come around. But if she's not ready yet, she can keep going around. And they'll kind of go around on opposite sides of the maypole. Now, it's true. I'm going to stop my share again. Am I back?
Yep.
So it's true that the materials that they use, so usually there's some arrangement of sticks, And then as some people might know, they also use all kinds of other objects from the environment to decorate that structure. But the character of the structure so those things vary based on what's available. With the satin bowerbirds, even they really like blue, so they often incorporate. I think there was some stuff like that in the image I showed, which is like plastic, like pieces of like human-made
Yep.
objects.
I noticed the pieces of plastic there.
Yeah, so it's just what's around.
Yeah.
And so humans are guilty of making just like amazing blue things that you would never find in nature. But anyway, but the structures, the character of the structure themselves it always has this character to it. And there's a bunch of these different types that all seem to serve this function, which is why, and that aspect of it is what we're modeling in the model. So like, and that parameter I talked about, which is like, oh, how protective is it? Could conceptually relate to something about like, oh, how tall is that little tree in the middle? Or like, how thick are the walls? How, something like how effective is it at protecting females versus just like having berries hanging on it or something like that.
Yeah, cool. Wow, it's great. Thank you for delving a little bit deeper into the bowerbird story too. I think that's a really fascinating one. But really, I think we're going to end there. It's so great to hear more about your research finally. I mean, as I mentioned, you and I got a chance to sort of pass each other in the hallway and chat a little bit about this, but I am glad to see sort of some of the end result here of all this work that you've put in and all the video, all the hours of scoring video. And oh my gosh, it's really cool to see. So I want to thank you for that. And I also want to just say for everybody who's on the webinar, thanks for coming today. We appreciate you being here. You found out about this somehow, so I encourage you to keep up with us. If you're not already following us on one of our social media channels, please do, because we'll be letting you know about other things that are coming up on those. Probably have another research spotlight before the semester is over here, maybe a science cafe or two in the evening, and hopefully another couple of afternoon lectures as well. So there's lots to come between now and May and June. So please stay tuned. And we didn't get to every question, I'm sorry, but we do have a report of the questions. I'll get those to Sam, and hopefully he'll be able to get in touch with those of you who've asked questions that we weren't able to ask and answer here on the webinar. So again, with that, I want to thank you all for being here. And Sam, thanks again so very much for doing this, and I wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was so fun. And thanks for everybody for tuning in.
All right, fantastic. See ya.
Take care.